where a woman is bound to a marriage, where there's no absolute indication or clear proof that her husband is passed or that the marriage has been terminated, she would not be allowed to go ahead and get married. And so as a basis, what we found is that generally the halacha is very lenient. It's very lenient when it comes to the requirements of testimony, and we'll continue to look at that. Sorry, did I lose the screen for you? 1 second. Okay, I'm using a different computer than I usually use, so I'm just gonna, wait, what happened? I lost this now. Okay, I think I've got it back and I'll be able to share it. Let me just make sure. Sharing the screen, and there we go. Okay. Can everyone see that now? Excellent. Fine. Let's go straight into the halachot. Again, I think in the interest of time, although initially I would always insist in reading Hebrew, I think we usually get through it better if we stick just to the English. So the Rambam now says the following rule applies when a woman tells her husband, okay, you divorced me in the presence of so-and-so and so-and-so, in other words, 2 witnesses, and those witnesses now come forward and they deny her statement. If afterwards she and her husband depart to a far-removed country, while peace prevails in the world at large, and she returns and she says, my husband died, her words are not accepted. You'll remember in the previous chapter, we said in a situation like this, her words are accepted. What's the difference over here? Because here she's already been a proven liar. She's considered a liar who desires to free herself from her ties to her husband. If one witness comes and testifies on her behalf that her husband died, she also should not be granted permission to marry, because we have this concern that maybe she hired this guy to testify. If she marries, nevertheless, she need not leave the second husband, for there is a witness who supports her. So this is a very unusual situation, right? She's been a proven liar, according in this instance. Then they go off and travel, and then when they come back, she has one witness comes forward to testify that her husband has passed away. We say we don't believe a single witness because maybe she hired him. But if she went ahead and got married, she would not have to get divorced. So it's a funny, interesting type of situation because there's a doubt around the testimony, but at the end of the day, there is a witness and there is testimony. And so if she did get remarried, she would be able to remain in that marriage. The second halacha, similarly, when there's a state of war in the world at large. So this is, now he's saying circumstances around us are different. The first example was the same world circumstance that we spoke about in the previous chapter, but she had already, compromised her own believability. In this situation, we're talking about where things are different in the world. And we're going to see, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive at first, but there is logic. When there's a state of war in the world at large, if a woman comes and says, my husband died in war, her words are not accepted, even where the couple's relationship is peaceful. What's the rationale? Because she will rely on a situation in which the likelihood is that he will die. Meaning, the people in front and at the rear were killed. She knows they went out to war. She knows the guy in front died and the guy behind him died. So she's assuming her husband died. She may think since these were killed and these were killed, he was also killed. In other words, she's not actually testifying to his passing. She's simply stating her assumption. And that we can't accept as proof of his death. For this reason, her words are not accepted. Even if she said he died in war and I buried him. Now this is, here the Rambam seems to take it a step further. And there's a lot of discussion in the commentaries what exactly is meant here, or others actually argue with this, because if she says I buried him, certainly that seems to be certain that he's dead. She's not just assuming that he died. But others say in the confusion, she might just be exaggerating, and she's just exaggerating her assumption. If however she says he died in bed, the words are accepted. In other words, if there's war going on outside, but she says we were at home in a suburb where the war was not taking place and he passed away, then it's just like every other situation. We're not worried that because then she's actually testifying. She's not just stating her assumption. In the third halakha, if we are not aware of a war raging in the world, and a woman comes forward and she says there's a war in a certain place and we went out there and my husband died there. So she shouldn't get married on that testimony. If however she did get married, she need not leave her second husband. You see, here we also have an interesting situation. If there's actual war, we wouldn't believe her. But the only reason we know there's a war that she told us there's a war. Right? So we have this idea in halakha that if you have a better law and you use a weaker law, we should believe you for using a weaker law. And as her better law would have been that they went on a cruise and he died. And peaceful times, The fact that she sets it up as war, so from that side, we don't want to believe her because in war times, as we said, people might just be stating assumptions and not giving testimony. On the other hand, we only know about this war from her words. So that's why we have this unusual situation again. The halacha would say don't get married. But if she did get married, she can remain married. The fourth halacha. Similarly, if a woman says, my husband died in a landslide, her words are not accepted. In the same vein, if an area was overrun by swarms of snakes, scorpions, she says he was bitten by a scorpion and died. We don't accept it. And again, the rationale is she might rely on the fact that most people die when they're bitten in this manner. And again, basically, she's making a statement that's just her assumption and is not an actual knowledge of his passing or testimony. Halacha 5. If a woman says they filled their house or cave in which we were hiding with smoke and he died, but I was saved, again, we don't accept her word because just as she was survived through a miracle, maybe he also survived by a miracle. Again, remember, this is this is what is common over here. All these statements are assumptions. If it is a year of famine, she says, my husband died, her word is not accepted. If she says he died and I buried him, then her word is accepted. It's not like war where there's immediate confusion. So if she says I buried him, then we accept her word as testimony. It's not just an assumption that because of the famine, he died. Halacha 6, if a woman says Gentiles or thieves attacked us, he was killed, but I was saved. So here we do accept her word. Why? Because it's quite common that those who attack will not necessarily kill the woman. It's not like saying, okay, because he's, you survived in a miracle, he would have survived as a miracle. We consider the way in which attackers approach a man and woman different. And it's just as, thus it's not fitting to say that just as she was saved, he was saved, because it is likely that she might have been saved and he not. And we can then go with her testimony, and she then could go on and marry. Just to remind you, and we'll reiterate this at the end of the chapter, why do we believe in this situation? Of course, because we want to ensure that a woman will be able to go and get remarried. But remember, we taking her out of a marriage, which is such a stringent thing, if her words were not to be true. And as we already stated in the last chapter, and we'll reiterate it here, is because this is something that can be proven. Meaning, if the husband is still alive, he'll show up tomorrow. So anybody that's giving this type of testimony is taking a chance. And that's why we accept a lesser form of testimony in the interest of enabling her to get married, and because we can rely on the fact that people don't usually lie about something that they can get shown up for. Halacha 7, if an epidemic was raging through the world, and we have first-hand experience of this now, it's not just a theoretical thing or to speak about something that happened in the past. The woman says, my husband died, her words are accepted. In other words, we don't say that because, well, why didn't you die if he died? Because there's no widely expected likelihood when it comes to a plague or an epidemic that everybody dies, because we know some people pass and some people don't. And it happens that young, strong men will die from the plague and elderly, infirm people will be saved. So therefore, we don't suspect that she's relying on the likelihood that most people die. When she says he died, she's not just saying an assumption because there's an epidemic in the world. She's actually saying it because she's testifying to the fact. Halacha 8, it has already been stated that a witness who did not see evidence of the person's death himself, but who testifies after hearing a statement from another person, is acceptable with regard to the verification of the death of a woman's husband. Again, this is a type of testimony that would never be accepted otherwise. This is like hearsay from a previous witness that you're now passing on. But when does that apply? When is the original testimony heard that our witness is now sharing acceptable? When the person heard the original witness by a mentally competent adult, even if it's a servant or a maid, right, and said that so-and-so died. If the person that he heard it from was mentally incompetent or was a minor, a child, and they're the ones that said that the person died, then we don't accept testimony on that, because we don't really rely on the original statement. So when do we say that, a second kind of witness can say, I heard so-and-so say it, is when we're talking about individuals whose testimony on their own would have been accepted. Then we can accept this second tier testimony, but not if they heard it from somebody that was not themselves acceptable. Halacha 9, there's an exception to the above principle. If a person heard children saying, so generally minors we don't listen to, but he says, if you chanced upon a group of children and they were talking to each other, the one says, we just came from so-and-so's funeral, and there were so many and so many people and recited eulogies, and this sage and so-and-so, and these others followed the bier, and this is what happened, and so on. In other words, if they give many details about what happened at the funeral, then a person can say, oh, I overheard these children speaking about so-and-so's funeral, and they gave so many details about it. On the basis of this, you would give the wife permission to remarry, because we accept that the children are saying it not with any malice or ill intent, or they're not saying it as testimony. We don't accept testimony of children. But because they were able to articulate so many details, it's clear that they experienced it and they were there, and we accept that as the truth. And this person who now is relaying it, we can rely on their word to allow the woman to then go on and get married. Halacha 10, when a Jew says, I killed so-and-so, now this is a fascinating halacha. Somebody comes along and says, I'm a murderer, I killed your husband. So what do we say? She is allowed to marry on the basis of his testimony. But Gewalt, what are you talking about? Murderers are not acceptable as witnesses. So here the Rambam says something so fascinating. What's the rationale? Because another rule in Jewish law is that we don't accept self-incriminating testimony. In other words, we have an unusual situation over here. Basically, when a guy comes and says, I killed your husband, what's he saying? He's saying, I'm a murderer. That's point one. The second point he's saying is your husband's dead. From a halachic point of view, we don't believe him to call himself a murderer because we don't accept self-incriminating evidence, but we do believe him that this woman's husband is dead. Very unusual situation, and therefore she can go ahead and get remarried. Halacha 11. It has already been stated that statements made by a Gentile in the course of conversation can be used as a basis to grant a woman's permission to remarry. This is what we call mesiach lefi tumah. If someone's just having a conversation and there seems to be no particular reason why they would say something, and we'll give an example of it in a moment, we accept their word at face value. So for example, a Gentile exclaims, oh, it's so terrible, so-and-so died. He was such a nice person. He did so much for me. Or if the Gentile was talking, he said, I was traveling, and to our amazement, so-and-so who was with us just fell and died. We were all so amazed at his sudden death. So if he makes this statement and there's no indication that his intention is to give testimony, we accept his words. It's an interesting thing, right? Because testimony has its own rules and regulations. If somebody's coming to testify, well, they have to reach a certain criteria. They have to be certain people to be accepted in the Jewish court. But mesiach lefi tumah, if someone's speaking and they're just saying something innocently, and it's clear and there's no ulterior motives, why should they be saying it? We accept their word. Okay? Halacha 12, when a Jew hears a Gentile say in the course of conversation that a man died, he may testify that he heard these statements. And the man's wife may be granted permission to remarry on this basis. Again, it's following the principle we said before. If this second tier, we'll call it witness, comes and he's sharing information from what was an acceptable testimony, that's fine. We then go on and we accept that. So when does this apply? When there's no rationale to explain why this Gentile would be making these statements, right? It has to be literally what we call mesiach lefi tumah. He's saying it completely innocently. But if there seems to be a reason why he's making that statement, if there's an ulterior reason why he's making that statement, we don't believe him. What's an example? If a non-Jew, a Gentile, goes over to a Jew and he says, do this for me, I'm going to kill you like I killed so-and-so. Now, on one hand, it would seem like he's just saying this innocently. I'll kill you like I killed so-and-so. But the halacha says no. We don't trust that. Because why is he saying, I'll kill you like I killed so-and-so? He's doing it for effect. He's trying to scare you. And maybe it's not true. It's not a simple, innocent statement. You follow? So in that situation, if there's some other reason why he might have said the statement, other than just innocently, we don't accept we don't accept it. Similarly, if a person overhears a Gentile legal authority, he goes into court and he hears the judge saying, we're going to execute so-and-so. So we executed so-and-so. In other words, again, in front of somebody that's come in there, we don't accept that as testimony that so-and-so has died, because it may very well be that the legal authority is simply saying this in order to instill fear in the person in front of them. So all similar situations is not considered mesiach lefi tumah. It's not innocent. There's a possibility of an ulterior reason why they're saying it, and we don't accept that statement. Okay, 14, when at first a Gentile made statements in the course of conversation, afterwards we ask questions by a Jew until we get all the details of the person's death was disclosed, we accept that. And then the woman is granted permission to remarry on this basis, but not the other way around. If you start asking questions and then it emerges that the person died, we don't accept it, because maybe he's saying it to satisfy something. But if he said something that indicated the person died and you ask a few more questions and he clarifies it, that would be good enough information. And based on that, the woman could get remarried. Halacha 15, it has already been stated that a witness who testifies, I heard so-and-so died, is acceptable with regard to testimony concerning a woman's husband. And the woman may remarry on this basis. This applies even when he heard the statements from a woman or from a servant. Okay, reiterating something we said previously. If I have a witness, a woman, or a servant says, so-and-so died, I saw that he died, then the witness should be asked, what did you see? How do you know that he died? If the witness' response is clear, is with clear testimony, his word is accepted. If the witness replies describing a situation in which it's highly likely that the person would have died, but not necessarily proof that he died, right? It's highly likely. We do not grant his wife license to remarry. For testimony concerning a man's death can be accepted only when the witness can say with certainty that he saw the man die and there's no doubt concerning the matter. Again, this is a point we said before. Testimony is different to sharing information innocently. And there is a certain power to sharing information innocently. But if you want your words to be accepted as actual testimony, it can be tested. And if it doesn't stand up to the questions, well, then we don't accept the information. Okay, halacha 16. Okay, so he gives an example. What's implied? What's the situation where the guy says, and we'll see this goes back to a similar thing where the wife says, where basically what emerges is that the person has made a statement that is their assumption, but it's not actual testimony or proof of death. What's implied? What are some cases, right? Where the guy says something and you're going to test their testimony. If a man was seen falling into the sea, even if he fell into the ocean, testimony should not be offered that the man died, because it's possible that he was cast away or escaped from the sea from an unseen place. In other words, you see someone falling in, okay, there's a strong likelihood, but it's not absolute, because there's also a very real possibility that he, current took him down and he came out somewhere else. So if you're saying he died, all you're really saying is you're saying your assumption. He says, if you fell into a body of water with defined boundaries, for example, a cistern or a cavern, and you're standing on the edge and you can see the entire periphery, and you say the person died, and you say, what do you mean he died? He said, well, I saw him fall in. And then you say, well, and I stood there for, let's say, 6 to 8 minutes or however long it takes a person to drown, and he never came up, then we would accept that testimony, because he can see where he may have otherwise got out. And if he was there looking the entire time, we can accept that as testimony that man has passed on. Similarly, if he was cast into the sea and then a net was cast in after him, and you drew out the net and there was a limb of a person, a limb that a person can't live without, then you can testify and say that he had died. There's the evidence that you saw him go in, and there's additional circumstantial evidence suggesting that the guy died. That's enough of a testimony. Halacha 17, if a man fell into a lair of lions, leopard, or the like, testimony that he died may not be offered. I saw him fall into the lion's den. I can't say I saw him die. But it's possible that they didn't eat him. Maybe they already had lunch, right? If he fell into a pit of snakes and scorpions, or into a furnace, or into a boiling cauldron filled with wine or oil, I'm not sure where this might be, in a witch's lair or something. But okay, how you fall in there, I'm not sure. Or if it's into a boiling cauldron, or is this? I mean, you'll. I think I have to give a warning over here. Disturbing images ahead. Just so I've given the warning. Or if his esophagus and windpipe was slit, either in the majority or the entirety, we understand that those are the two most critical life flowing pipes, if you want, in the body. So if somebody says that they saw that happen, then you can say they died, even if you see him get up and run away, because in those situations, the wound that's inflicted is fatal. So even though you didn't see them drop dead, but you know that it's a fatal wound and they will be dying shortly, that's enough. If you've seen that, if you saw the fatal wound inflicted, you can testify that they died. Certainly laws apply in all situations in which it's impossible that the person will live, but rather will die shortly after. His testimony will be offered that he died. Now, this is also a little bit gruesome. If you see a man hanging and there's vultures eating from his body, testimony may not be offered that he died. Okay, yeah, we have circumstances where people survived that somehow. And he says, similarly, if a person was stabbed with a lance or arrows were shot at him, by the way, this would be obviously, so long as it's not a lance in a place in the body that was clearly fatal. If we see vultures eating from a place that would cause him to die, meaning you see him eating from one of his vital organs like his brain or heart or his intestines, then you can give testimony that he's died. Okay, a bit gruesome, but these are some of the details that the Rambam goes into. Halacha 19. The following law applies when one witness testifies, I saw that he died in a war, or in a landslide, or that he drowned in the ocean and died, or mention other causes that would probably lead to death. If he said, again, so we said all of those, it's his assumption, that's not enough of testimony. But if he says, I saw this and then I buried him, then we do accept him. and she can be married. She can remarry based on that. If he did not say I buried him, then she should not be granted permission to remarry. If however she remarried, she need not leave the second husband. Okay, so all those cases where we don't accept the testimony upfront per se, but there is a very high likelihood or possibility that that the guy has actually passed on. So if she did go ahead and get remarried, we would not make her come out. There's also a bit of an assumption here that she herself would verify this, because she wouldn't want to put herself in a situation where she remarries and then has to divorce basically both husbands if the guy is still alive. So we also rely a little bit, it would seem, on the fact that she herself, before she got remarried, would have done good research to verify what this guy is testifying to. Halacha 20. Similarly, if one witness testifies that a woman's husband drowned in the sea or in a body of water that does not have defined periphery, he did not emerge from the water, all traces of him have disappeared, and his existence has been forgotten, the woman should not be granted license to remarry in those spaces, as we explained. Now, this is where it gets very complicated. This halacha speaks to circumstances which required a lot of detailed investigation. These are situations which today we don't have so often, but at times when men went out to war somewhat regularly, and there were unusual situations, you had to verify things, and a lot of investigation went in to try and verify, what type of circumstances would allow husbands to remarry. I could just say in recent history, I don't remember the details offhand, but a situation that gave rise to many questions about agunot. In other words, where there was strong circumstantial evidence that men had died, but no actual testimony. So the rabbis had to find ways of verifying the death of these people that are not mentioned in halacha. Was the one incident that I remember in recent history was the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. Many Jewish men were working on those towers that were killed. But they had to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, eventually they had to identify with DNA, and they relied on that, even though that's not conventional, right? Testimony generally has to be eyewitness. But if I'm not mistaken, that's what they relied on in those instances. But back when men went out to war regularly and there was less verifiable information available, they had to find ways of enabling sort of proof of death so that the woman could get remarried. If, however, she remarries, she need not be forced to leave her second husband. Even if a Gentile said in the course of conversation, so drowned at sea, and on this basis the man's wife remarried, she need not be forced to leave her second husband. Nevertheless, in the above instances, the sage who gave permission for her to remarry should be placed under a ban of ostracism. In other words, the point is that they need more verification than just those statements that are not provable, and where there's reason to believe that it's just assumptions and not actual testimony. Halacha 21. The following rule applies when the body of a man who was slain or died of natural causes is discovered. So this is talking about how do we identify this as so-and-so's husband. So you have a body, but now you need to identify that this is the person that was married to this woman. So if his forehead, his nose, and his facial features are intact and his identity can be established based on them, testimony concerning his death may be offered. If, however, any of these identifying factors is missing, even if there are signs through which he can be identified, in other words, other body, birthmarks or things on his body or on his personal artifacts, even if one of those signs is a mole, testimony concerning his death should not be offered. Again, this would be also something that needed to be taken into account, because people killed on a battlefield, that they might have gone to war, but until somebody identifies that particular individual died, you don't have proof of passing, and the woman would be stuck until you find a way of verifying it, right? When does the leniency mentioned in the first clause apply? When the corpse was seen within 3 days of his murder or death. After 3 days have passed, testimony concerning his death should not be offered because his facial features may have become distorted. So we don't actually accept identifying a body after 3 days. Halacha 22. The following rule applies when a man drowned at sea and was cast out onto dry land. Although several days have passed, if his facial features and his nose can be identified, testimony may be offered with regard to his death. 4. In water, the features of a corpse do not become distorted until an extremely long period of time has passed. In other words, we're saying what we said before, when somebody, God forbid, drowns in water, the time period extends. If the corpse lay on, I'm just saying, in recent times, where there's disfiguration, you can't identify a body. There are other ways to identify the body nowadays, directly through like dental records. And of course, if we with more scientific depth through DNA and so on and so forth. But obviously back then, the only way to identify was through physical features. And it must be, we're saying it must be the facial features, not other circumstantial features. If a corpse lay on dry land for 12 hours after being cast out of the sea and the corpse became bloated, testimony may not be offered because his features have been distorted. When we look at the form of a corpse in order to identify a man to offer testimony with regard to his death, it is acceptable if we look at the corpse even by candlelight or the moonlight. So there's a leniency, you don't have to see it in bright daylight. The following rule applies when we see a person at a distance and he says that he is so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, or so-and-so from a particular place, and that he has been bitten by a snake and is dying. Even if we go to the place where he was standing and find the corpse and discover that its features have changed to the extent that it is no longer distinguishable, we can nevertheless grant license to his wife to remarry. So somebody says, I saw your husband. He called out to me. He says, hi, I'm Yaakov, the son of Yitzchak, and I've just been bitten by a snake. And by the time they reach him, it's 3 days later, so you can't identify him, but the body is there. That's enough, and she can marry based on that. 24, a person's testimony is effective in the following instances. A person came and said, a court or people told me, when you arrive at this in this place, tell them Yitzchak, the son of Michael, died. When this person came to that place and delivered the message, although he's not aware of the identity of the deceased, as he didn't know Yitzchak and Michael, he's just passing on a message that they told me Yitzchak, the son of Michael, died. Since the people at that place do know his identity, the deceased wife may be granted permission to remarry. In other words, she knows that he visited Joburg. And when this guy coming from Joburg to Cape Town comes along and says, well, they've told me that Yitzchak Michael died, that's enough. We do not presume that perhaps there was another person named Yitzchak, the son of Michael, who died. Halacha 25, when a Jew and a Gentile left from our location for a different destination, the Gentile came and said in the course of conversation, the man who left the city with me died, even though he didn't know him personally. He can't say the name. He just says, remember that guy that we lived with, or the wife may be granted license to remarry. This applies even when the Gentile does not know the identity of the man, provided he says, I buried him. He can't just say, oh, we were on the way and he got lost and I'm assuming he died. He says, he died and I buried him. Halacha 26, similarly, when 10 men were taken together while shackled and chained or tied by heavy ropes used to lead camels and the like from one place to another, and a Gentile came and said in the course of conversation that all 10 men who went out while tied died, and he buried them, the wise man granted license to remarry. Again, so people know they went out in these dangerous circumstances. This guy's coming towards the town. He doesn't know any of the 10, but he says, there was this caravan of 10 people and they died, I buried them. We accept his word. And each of those wives, if these were married men, can then go and marry based on that testimony. Halacha 27, if a Jew says, a Jewish man died in our company in this and this place, these and these were his facial features, these and these were his signs of identification, we do not make a guess and say that it was probably so-and-so. Rather, the person is not considered to have died until the witness mentions his name and the name of his city. So this is where in one city, a woman's husband's gone missing. She's not sure if he's died. We know his name. People come and they say, oh, we saw so-and-so, and it sounds similar to him. That's not good enough. If, however, a person says, one of the inhabitants of the city of so-and-so journeyed out in our company and died, we check in that city. If only one man left the city, his wife may be given permission to remarry. This is a different situation where he can't say the name, but he can say for certain that it was from this city. And we know that only one person traveled from that particular city, whose wife is now missing the husband. And he says, yes, there was a person with us from such and such a place, and he died and we buried him. Then we can assume that it's her husband, and she can get married on that assumption because we know that that individual died. Halacha 28. The following rule applies if a document was found saying so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, died, or so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, was killed. Remember, testimony generally must be verbal by eyewitnesses. Here we're talking about you've got a document where it's written. If it can be determined that this was written by a Jew, the man's wife may be given permission to remarry. Again, a leniency. Similarly, when a person has lost the power of speech and he was tested, as he would be tested with regard to a get, and it is proven that he's mentally sound, if he writes that so-and-so died, we may rely on his writing and the deceased wife may be given permission to remarry. We do not follow the standard process of interrogation in these situations. With regard to witness testifying concerning the death of a woman's husband, for our sages did not speak about establishing stringencies regarding such matters. This is basically, he's wrapping up our whole approach and attitude towards this situation. We're not looking to interrogate people. We'll accept the information because we don't want to add stringencies here. And indeed, the approach was characterized by leniency in order to permit a woman without a husband to remarry. And in the final halakha, he explains the rationale that we mentioned in the previous chapter in our referred to earlier, he says, do not wonder at the fact that our sages discharged the prohibition against the married woman, which is considered a very severe matter, on the basis of the testimony of a woman, a servant, or a maidservant, or statements made by a Gentile in the course of conversation, or a written statement or testimony that was not investigated by the ordinary process of interrogation. As we've explained, right, all these are exceptional cases. None of these would stand up generally as acceptable testimony in court, and yet we accept the information that's shared in these ways in this circumstance, again, because we want to allow the possibility for the woman to then go on and get remarried. But there has to be also some logical basis as to why we accept the testimony, not just because we want to be nice, so to speak. We have to have kind of a further rationale. So he explains, these leniencies were instituted because the Torah requires only testimony of 2 witnesses, and all the other details of the laws of witnesses with regard to matters that cannot be verified definitively except via the witnesses and their testimony. So, for example, one person killed another, and two witnesses come and say, we saw it. Or one person lent money to another. 2 witnesses come and say, we saw it. Without their testimony, we wouldn't know about it. We can never verify it or disregard it in any other way other than their testimony. But when, by contrast, the matter may be verified definitively without the testimony of the witness, meaning like this, the witness comes and says so-and-so died, but in 2 weeks' time, the guy can show up. It can be verified that way, right? So, and the witness cannot justify a statement if they are not true, meaning that, right, when one testifies that a person died, the Torah did not necessitate that the requirement of a formal testimony be met in these instances, for it is unlikely that a witness will testify falsely. Why? Because he'd be setting himself up to be exposed. Because if the guy hadn't died, if he's not sure about it, he won't say it. Because if the guy hadn't died, the guy will show up and he won't be able to explain himself. So for this reason, our sages extended the leniency with regard to this matter and accepted the testimony of a single witness that is based on the testimony even of a maidservant or from a written document, testimony that was not investigated by the ordinary process of interrogation. And these leniencies were accepted so that the daughters of Israel would not be forced to remain unmarried. Hilchos Gershom, Sliku Hilchos Gershom Siyata Shmaya. We have now completed the laws of divorce with the help of Hashem. Okay. That brings us to the end of today's chapter.